Hey, hello everyone. Again, my name is Rose. I am the community educator at Women's Advocates, and we are going to be diving deeper into Domestic Violence 101. And again, for those of you who are just joining, we do have Domestic Violence 101 often, where we dive into the more surface level basics of domestic violence. Still very useful information. So if you are interested in that, feel free to check out our website and sign up whenever we have these webinars available. But yeah, with that, we are going to dive right into 201, just a little bit deeper into domestic violence, what that looks like. And if you've attended a lot of our webinars in the past, you'll probably be familiar with a lot of things, a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today. So I want to share just a little bit about Women's Advocates as a nonprofit before we dive straight into today's topics. But we work with domestic violence victims. We are a shelter located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we just offer all sorts of services from our crisis line, education and outreach, doing exactly what we're doing right now with webinars, presentations, events. Our shelter, we again are located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we house victim survivors and their families of domestic violence, children included. We have a pet foster program now, and we help with a lot of housing stability and child and family support through our services. So if you want to know more about that, feel free to check out our website. Feel free to keep in touch with us if there are any resources or anything that you may need from us. But just a little history. We began early in the 1970s as a legal advice helpline, helping women who were seeking divorce. And a lot of the people working this helpline quickly found out that a lot of these women who were seeking divorce were trying to get away from abusive marriages and relationships and not having anywhere to go. A lot of these workers who worked the helpline opened up their homes to a lot of these women and children who needed a place to stay. And realizing that that was not sustainable in the long run, the first domestic violence shelter in the nation is born. And till this day, known as Women's Advocates, we are still doing our part to help victim survivors of domestic violence, trying to end the cycle of domestic violence, trying to educate on domestic violence. And we are here today. It's been 50 years since, a little over 50 years actually. But we're still here and we're doing what we have to do. So again, if you know anybody who may need our services, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help, offer any resources, anything of the sort. But this is our land acknowledgement. Before I read it out loud to us, I'm going to copy and paste the full land acknowledgement in the chat for everybody. You can visit that link if you'd like to read it for yourself and know more. But the land acknowledgement says Women's Advocates work takes place on Dakota land. The area that is now St. Paul was stolen from the Dakota people by the American government through centuries of wars, broken treaties, and acts of cultural genocide. Through incredible perseverance and resistance, the Dakota are still here and strong. Native women and girls face the highest risks of domestic violence, sexual assault, and intimate partner homicide. We express our gratitude for the Indigenous-led organizations who are working each day towards a world without domestic and sexual violence. And as an organization, we commit ourselves to supporting tribal sovereignty with the same fervor that we support the self-sovereignty of victim survivors. Again, if you'd like to read more about that, feel free to visit the link in the chat. Otherwise, I will move on. In the next 90 minutes or so that we have together, there will be 3 different parts that we will be exploring. So coercive control and the impacts of abuse. A lot of times, why don't we believe victim survivors, or why don't the people who are surrounded by victim survivors, why don't they believe their stories? What does that look like? And how we can do better to shift the culture. I want to launch a poll really quickly. If you can see the poll, please do take the poll for me. That would be great for me to kind of just gauge where everybody is at. But what brings you here to this training, and what specifically are you hoping to learn about? There is no right or wrong answer. So if you can answer those for me, and this is multiple choice, so you can choose more than one answer. Um, I'll give us a couple seconds to do that, and then I will share the results and I will move on to part one. Okay, a couple more seconds. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results with everyone. We'll have a couple more polls as we go, so if you didn't get to take this one, that's totally fine. But we have answers just all across the board, expanding your understanding of abusive relationship dynamics, deepening your knowledge of emotional abuse tactics. Um, Good to know. Good to know. Again, just good for me to gauge where everybody's at. But thank you all for taking the poll. I will get us started now with part one. So exploring coercive control and the impacts of abuse. So all tactics on this list are aimed towards gaining power and control over the other person and taking away their sense of agency. And your sense of agency is being a person's capacity to act independently and make their own free choices. And as you can see on the screen, we want to emphasize this message that domestic violence takes many, many forms and not just physical violence. We have things like verbal violence, emotional, financial, sexual violence, using children, using pets and property, mental violence, social, digital, spiritual, and legal. So on this slide, a little bit more about power and control and what does that look like. So diving deeper into how domestic violence isn't just physical violence. A lot of times when victim survivors are going through an abusive relationship, people tend to focus just on the physical because you simply just want to survive. You want to be away from the abuse and from this person. Um, and then a lot of times the emotional well-being, the mental well-being of a person is neglected until much later on. So we want to let everybody know that domestic violence is a 24/7 pattern designed to exert power and control over another person. And this makes the victim survivor, of course, feel small, afraid, and unsafe around the abusive person, the perpetrator, using all sorts of things like using children to manipulate them. And this, of course, then causes a lot of traumatic experiences for the child as well. We have webinars speaking on children and the trauma of going through abuse. If anybody is interested, feel free to visit our YouTube channel. We'll just keep updated with us when we give these webinars. And if you want to be a part of it, isolation, economic abuse and coercion. Today we'll talk a lot more about what coercion looks like. But domestic violence is an intentional and systematic pattern of physical and psychological abuse, threats, intimidation, isolation, or economic coercion, and again, used to really exert power and control over another person. So diving deeper into coercive control, I am going to launch another poll for us. And as you are all taking this poll, I will continue just kind of talking more about coercive control, what that is. But the poll says, coming into this webinar, how familiar are you with the concept of coercive control? So a sociologist named Evan Stark popularized the concept of coercive control, which he explains in his book called How Men Entrapped Women in Personal Life. Even with passage of Violence Against Women, Women's Act, and increased criminalization of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, homicide rates weren't going down. And so Evan Stark was wondering why that is. And through his research, judicial systems, responses, everything of the sort, and insights of survivors, advocates, He realized that the anti-violence movement's conceptualization of domestic violence um, was leaving out victim survivors who were most likely to be murdered by a partner. And this happens all the time. Unfortunately, when a victim survivor is trying to leave an abusive situation, an abusive relationship, it's not as easy as just simply leaving the relationship, because leaving a relationship is the most dangerous time for a victim survivor. This leads to a lot of murder, a lot of deaths. And so another way of kind of conceptualizing domestic violence that often encompasses all of the previously mentioned forms of abuse. The goal of emotional abuse is to kind of destabilize someone's emotionally and psychologically. So abusers will say it's all the victim's fault, and that the message kind of starts to sink in that the victim is the crazy one, the victim is the one that's acting out. And so the abusive person's narrative starts to cloud the victim survivor's own perspective and understanding of what's happening, making it harder to confront the abuse, to confront the person, and of course, to leave overall. Thank you, everybody, for taking the poll. I'm going to end it now and share the results. So a lot of you are very familiar with it. A lot of you have heard of the concept of coercive control before, but you want to know more. But for the most part, you either have heard of it or you know about it. So this is good. This is really good for me to know. Um, again, thank you for taking the poll. We'll have more as we continue on here, but coercive control does create invisible chains and a sense of fear that kind of pervades all elements of a victim survivor's life. And it works to kind of limit their human rights by depriving them of freedom, agency, and their ability to make their own decisions. So, the presence of firearms is the most important risk factors for femicides, particularly if the man or the partner has threatened murder in the past. But two factors, unique to abusive relationships, also kind of predict fatality, whether the couple had separated after living together and whether an abuser was highly controlling in addition to being violent. So when both factors were present, the chance that a survivor would be killed by her partner was 900% greater than when those factors weren't present. So a lot of these also include frequent use of alcohol, frequent use of drugs, or the presence of sexual abuse were present in these relationships. Again, falling under the umbrella of domestic violence, and how that can kind of escalate things into the murder of a victim survivor. So, and coercive control can be wielded in a lot of different ways, usually falling under these categories on the screen. We have destabilizing, so throwing them off balance to kind of get them to ignore their instincts or red flags, to ignore their gut feeling. And you see this a lot at the beginning of a relationship with what we know and what we call love bombing, to kind of gain trust and encourage dependence, and making it harder for the victim survivor to recognize what's happening, and that the love bombing is abuse and that it's harder to leave the relationship. So at first, controlling partners are unusually attentive, romantic, and charming. And they may be, really helpful, and possessiveness is a thing in these relationships, which again, at the beginning of a relationship might sound flattering. You might think that this person loves you so much and that they want to spend time with you. They want to be with you all the time. But further down the road, we know that that can very much turn into a very dangerous situation. So later, destabilization might look like depriving of victim survivors of sleep. So keeping them up all night so that they're unable to think clearly, controlling what they do, what they wear, where they can go, who they can hang out with. And the further down you are in the relationship, it makes it harder for the victim survivor to really leave the relationship, especially if the abuser is able to then gain control and isolate this person. Next on the screen, we have isolation, deprivation of freedom. So this separates the victim survivor from their support system, friends and family members, also really ensuring that the victim survivor only hears that the abusive person, hearing what the abusive person says and believes. And so, again, playing into really isolating this person, not letting them have this freedom to really be themselves, to think freely, to have their own beliefs, and denial of outside perspectives that could help victim survivors realize that they are going through abuse, or what they're going through is falling under the umbrella of abuse and domestic violence. And if the victim survivor were to have a support system with friends and family, and these friends and families tend to kind of catch on with what the abuser is saying and doing, then of course makes it a little bit harder for the abuser to really isolate and control the victim survivor. And so oftentimes they would use isolation as a tactic to really gain control and power over the victim survivor. Next, we have monitoring and micro-regulation. So abusive people might force victim survivors to hand over passwords, monitor their time online, know who they talk to, track their movements with GPS. And in many cases, the abusive person will engage in stalking to kind of ensure the victim survivor is where they say that they are. So regulation includes deciding how a person will dress, how they will act, their budget, what they can spend money on, how much they can spend money on, their diet, what they talk about, what their beliefs are. So basically really forcing a victim survivor to act only in ways that the abusive person deems acceptable. And then we have the fourth one, so threats and physical intimidation. Abusive people will use intimidation or threats to kind of compel a victim survivor to comply. Physical or sexual violence might be used to threaten the victim survivor, and it only takes one incident, one bruised arm, or one incident of forced sexual acts for a victim survivor to learn that it's quote unquote easier or less harmful for them if they were to really just do whatever it is that the abuser wants them to do. Because again, if the victim survivor were to retaliate against this, whether they were to act upon something or they were to say something, could very much easily escalate things, which leads to the murder of a lot of victim survivors. And so in order to really just try and stay alive, to survive, they find that it's, again, quote unquote, easier if they simply just submit to whatever it is that the abusive person wants from them. So, after the incidents, victim survivors will always have the fear in their mind that the abusive person could and they would hurt them again if they were to try and say and do something, if they were to try and escape the relationship. And there are many, many obstacles to leaving an abusive relationship. It's not as easy as just getting up and leaving. We talk a lot about these things in our Domestic Violence 101 webinars. But things like financial issues, not having a home, not having a job, having children, having pets, everything of the sort can be or serve as a barrier to leaving an abusive domestic violence situation. So all of these are elements of coercive control. And coercive control is a tailored experience we talk about in Domestic Violence 101, about domestic violence being different from crimes committed by a stranger because of the intimate relationships that one may have with these individuals. So the person doing the harm has deep knowledge of the person they are harming, and can tailor their actions to be uniquely harmful in ways that a stranger wouldn't know, right? Which is why a lot of times when we talk about abuse, we talk about how it starts at home, whether that's child abuse, um, abuse from family members, abuse from your partners. These people know you personally, they know you intimately, and there's a whole spectrum to it. So if these people know what your weaknesses are, they know what you like, they know what you don't like, they know what your schedule is like, it's a lot easier for them to then try and control you and to try and abuse you. Again, very much tailoring their actions to further abuse you. So actions that could seem, really insignificant, trivial, even benign to someone outside of the relationships are sometimes within the relationship so much more than that. So it could be a lot more dangerous for the victim survivor, especially going through it so much. It builds up, tension builds up. But to a lot of people outside of the relationship might look at that and think, well, that's not a big deal, right? You had one fight, you had one small quarrel, they said one thing about you that was probably mean, offensive, rude. Um, but to you, obviously, right? If you are in the relationship, things get out of hand. You see everything that this person does and says, tension builds up. They make these small passing comments all the time. And it's not just a one-time incident. So in the relationship, what that looks like and you know how much that can affect you. So knowing a little bit more from Evan Stark in the women's experiences of coercive control. It is filled with gestures and other behavioral cues that their um, astute sensitivity tells them are threatening but appear benign or unintelligible to outsiders. So victim survivors become hypersensitive to kind of the smallest actions. Again, just small comments here and there, belittling the victim survivor's small actions here and there. But over time, it just builds up into something much bigger. And so victim survivors tend to kind of scan for threatening intents, um, hurtful words, hurtful comments. And to those on the outside, their vigilance might seem excessive. They don't see why somebody would be so hypersensitive to their surroundings or being around this abusive person. They probably don't understand why. Um, but knowing that, again, being in the relationship, you see all that's happening, you see the actions, you hear the words. Um, and so you become very hypersensitive to everything. Um, so when we do get to work with victim survivors, we want to be mindful of that, what that may look like, what that may sound like, um, and that even if you are away and safe from the abuser, you are not near the abuser, you are not near the abuse. A lot of times victim survivors will still be very hypersensitive and hyper vigilant of their surroundings. So um, when we work with victim survivors, it's usually not enough to ask someone something like, are you experiencing coercive control in your relationship? A lot of times you can't really process what you're going through if you're still in the middle of going through it. So a lot of times victim survivors might not even know what coercive control is, even if they are going through it. So um, when people have no idea what that may look like, it is then our job to really tell them what that may look like, to educate them on that, uh, and to make it known that you are in the situation and here's what we can do to help you with that. So if you're concerned about someone who you may know or who you are working with, um, if their relationship is a safe one, if you are ever wondering if your relationship is a safe one, questions like these on the screen that ask about specific abusive or controlling behaviors can be the most effective way to go about it. So if they do answer to yes to any of these questions, you can begin to kind of talk to them about how these behaviors aren't healthy and are probably scary for them to witness or to experience, and using examples rather than asking general questions about, are you experiencing abuse? Are you going through domestic violence right now? Even if a victim survivor were to know that they are experiencing abuse, a lot of times they don't really know the words to describe it. Again, they might not even know what coercive control is. And so it's good for us, or good for me to know, that a lot of you, after taking the poll, know what coercive control is. You are familiar with it, or you've heard of it before. So now you are able to better explain it for victim survivors if you were to ever come across working with any victim survivors who might not know what coercive control is, but they are going through it. So asking a lot of the questions on the screen, like, um, so does someone in your life badger you into until you give in to their demands? Does someone in your life um, have access to your passwords, monitor your social media, control you, control who you interact with online, a lot of times who you interact with offline in real life? Does someone in your life force you to do things that you don't want to do, sexually, physically, anything of the sort, and really gauging where the victim survivor is in that moment and then continuing on from there. So on this screen, we have the impact of coercive control, and this is what can happen to victim survivors who have had their freedom taken away or erased through coercive control. So diminished social life. If the victim survivor tries to spend time with others, again, friends or family members, the abusive person objects or makes it difficult for them. So the victim survivor ends up living in a very diminished, isolated life. Next, we have annihilation of self, so silencing of opinions, because the abusive person becomes upset easily. Things can, of course, then escalate into something so much more. So the victim survivor kind of gives into the abusive person's decision because it just doesn't seem worth disagreeing with them, even if they do. Again, tying this back into what we talked about a little bit earlier, it's just quote unquote easier if you just submit to whatever it is that the abusive person wants. So the survivor becomes afraid to make waves, to kind of rock the boat, to express disagreement, to express dissatisfaction in the relationship. And so they start to really silence themselves. And their self-esteem tends to plummet as they are subjected to frequent criticism through this. We have things like loss of agency. So violence, adding that with coercive control. Your freedom, again, is taken away. And diving back a little bit deeper into Evan Stark and his work, we are a reminder that we talked about this a little bit earlier too, but presence of coercive control is a more accurate prediction of lethality. And so when a lot of these things that we see on the screen are present in an abusive relationship, a lot of it can lead to murder of a victim survivor if things were to really escalate. The screen, we have a quote from Bonnie, a survivor of coercive control. Again, according to the study and work of Evan Stark. So the core injustice of coercive control is to make the survivor feel like a prisoner in their own home. Their power is taken away from them, and they don't get to make many decisions about their own lives. And these decisions are made by someone who wishes them to be small, submissive, obedient, and of course, afraid. Very much playing into trying to have power and control over this person. The quote that we have on the screen from the survivor named Bonnie is, "So many days my work had no end. I was a prisoner. My life was his." So most of the harms involving coercive control are gender-specific infringements of adult autonomy that are currently invisible to the law. When we talk about domestic violence, we always talk about the law and how they either are or they're not doing their part to really help victim survivors who are going through abuse. So again, many of the things abusers do are in many cases perfectly legal. And many of the things that survivors do they have to kind of cope with the abuse that they're going through. They have to focus on survival, living on survival mode all the time, and trying to escape the victim survivor or trying to escape the abuser, excuse me. Um, and it's a lot harder to do so when the legal system is not on your side. Um, and if a lot of the actions of the perpetrator is perfectly legal to do, then it just makes it harder to really find community and find safety. So doing our part, again, we can advocate for more coercive control laws, um, demanding more ways to help victim survivors who are trying to escape their abusive relationships, doing more within our organizations. If you work with victim survivors of domestic violence, whether that's adults or children, doing more in our organizations to really um, help victim survivors gain that sense of safety. And we do want to let everybody know that more incarceration is never really the permanent answer, but these laws would force the legal system to recognize some of the more insidious forms of abuse and recognizing it as wrong and harmful to a lot of victim survivors. So again, really, really doing our part to see what we can change. So on the screen, we have a question. So what are potential problems or barriers that victim survivors might face when trying to seek justice regarding coercive control? If you'd like to think about that to yourself for a second, feel free to do so. If you want to type that out into the chat, I would love to read your answers and what you have to say, whether that's like a personal thing that you've gone through, a personal thing that you've gone through with working with victim survivors, but simply just based off of what you know. Please, by all means, do leave it in the chat. And if you are still typing, feel free to continue to do so. Even if I've moved on to the next slide, I still would like to revisit and read all your thoughts. So with that, we know about the impacts of abuse. We know a little bit more about what coercive control is, what that may look like, sound like. So we're going to move into part 2. Why don't we believe? So wanting to make it known that survivors shouldn't have to earn the belief of other people. So when they tell their story, we want to be able to empathize with them, right? Offer them resources, offer them help, believe their stories that they are being abused by somebody, and that there really is no support system for them, especially if they're facing a lot of isolation and the legal system is not on their side. There's not a lot for them, not a lot of people for them to kind of lean on and talk to. And so when they share their stories with us, even as advocates, as friends, family members, we want to be able to believe their stories and not have to make them prove their pain to us, not have to make them earn our belief and trust. We want to be able to not minimize their experiences and invalidate them. We want to be able to fully be able to trust them and their stories and be able to offer our help in any way that we can. Somebody said, will they be believed? Since there is no physical proof, quote unquote proof, I like that it's abuse. Yeah, um, that's a good one. Thank you for saying that in the chat, because a lot of times if you were to report abuse, right, and a lot of times people focus so much on physical abuse and physical safety. If this person didn't physically hit you, if this person didn't physically harm you in any way, then therefore you should be fine. Therefore, there should not be an issue. Therefore, if you really just wanted to up and leave this relationship, you have every right to do so, and you should just pack your things and leave and go, and all is well. But it's not that simple. And we all know that, especially if you are familiar with the concept of coercive control, we all know that it's not that simple to simply just leave. Even if physical abuse isn't present in a relationship, it can still very much be abuse and domestic violence if it involves a lot of the other forms of violence that we talked about. So emotional, mental, digital abuse, everything of the sort. Um, Somebody said fear of not being believed, not having access to financial accounts or required documents. Absolutely. And that is a problem that we see all the time working with victim survivors where they can't um, get the help that they need, excuse me, or they can't get the help that they need quick enough because there's just no documents. Um, and a lot of times these legal systems require all sorts of documents of proof and just everything of the sort, and you don't have access to these, or there is none. And so you are kind of just left to kind of deal with the situation on your own. Thank you, everybody, for sharing in the chat. But another question is, why do victim survivors stay silent? Why don't they say anything? A lot of times I think people wonder this, and this can kind of very easily teeter into a victim blaming mindset where, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just say something? Why are you speaking up now? Why are you speaking up years later? Why didn't you say something when things were happening in the moment? Um, that can very much teeter into a very victim blaming mindset, but sometimes we want to be mindful of what we are saying, what we're thinking. And so wondering, why do the victim survivors stay silent? Why don't they say anything? Why don't they speak up on the abuse? Not necessarily to victim blame, but to just know deeper into what we can do then to help if we understand what a victim survivor is thinking and what they are going through and why they are choosing to stay silent sometimes. Or maybe it's not a choice. Maybe they don't have a choice. They have to stay silent for the sake of survival. So victim survivors are often automatically accused of lying. We see this and hear this all the time. But when a perpetrator is exposed of lying, the stigma doesn't stick. Um, so why is it that um, we're wary of victim survivors making false accusations, but rarely consider how many abusers have kind of blatantly lied about being abusive or downplaying their abuse or manipulating others to cover up their own actions? So believing victim survivors is not just believing them at all cost, and not really doing your own research about it or investigating about it. You know, these people that you work with, if again, they don't have to prove their pain to you, right? They don't have to show you all their bruises and scars. They don't have to earn your trust and respect, but we do want to be able to um, believe their stories, but also know what kind of abuse is happening, what's going on, um, but also a lot of times not really talking and thinking for ourselves, but thinking and talking for the legal system. Why don't they believe victim survivors? If somebody accuses somebody of abuse, rape, domestic violence, anything of the sort, why is it kind of brushed off as this person is being dramatic, this person is lying, this person doesn't have proof that they were physically assaulted or they were physically abused in any way. Um, and then that, of course, then creates a lot of barriers for victim survivors, but also wondering why people choose not to believe victim survivors when they come out about their stories, and then wondering why a lot of victim survivors choose then to stay silent about their stories if they know that they're not going to be believed anyway. So, credibility, the quality of being trusted and believed in, and the quality of being convincing or believable. So we have on the screen what we call the credibility complex, so legal and cultural forces that contribute to discounted credibility for accusers, inflated credibility for accused, and we have the internalized credibility discount, so victim survivors minimize, dismissing their own experiences of abuse. So again, diving deeper into why a lot of people tend to not believe victim survivors in their stories. And a lot of times very much being manipulated and letting the abuser, the perpetrator, kind of coerce and talk you into believing the abuser instead. We see this all the time. Unfortunately, again, we see it all the time, where the abuser would be this, people would use words like, this person is very kind, this person is very charming, this person is very smart. Why would they be abusive if, to me, they are very charming, they are very smart, very kind, but to you, you're saying that they're not, you're saying that they're abusive, but you don't have any proof that this person is abusive. You don't have any um, physical scars, any bruises to show that this person has physically harmed you in any way. Um, and so, again, making it a lot harder for the victim survivor to step up and share their stories, um, because now they feel like they have to prove that they are being abused, especially if the abuse is not physical abuse, right? They are going through a lot of verbal abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, but because they don't have these physical scars to show you, um, that they are being abused, and therefore people kind of throw it all out the window, like, that's not believable. We choose not to believe the victim survivor. Um, and a lot of times you see this in, I feel like, a lot of things in the media. So you see this in even a lot of things like movies and TV shows, where somebody um, is very hypersensitive, hyper vigilant, and you have this person who is like, oh, well, this person is crazy. They act like this all the time. This is what they do all the time. They say these things that they don't really mean it. Um, and these people tend to, and then other people outside of the relationship tend to think like, well, this person is right. This person, the victim survivor, is acting out, hypersensitive, hypervigilant, but the perpetrator is saying like, well, this person is crazy. Don't believe what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know what they're doing. Um, and using all sorts of excuses to really then um, have people believe the perpetrator instead of the victim survivor, further isolating the victim survivor from gaining a trustworthy support system. So think about recent high-profile lawsuits in court cases that you may have heard of, that you may have been a part of even, and where have you seen the credibility complex in action? So in the chat, can you think of examples of the credibility complex in action? Um, or if you'd like to think about it to yourself, feel free to do that. Again, if you are typing into the chat, feel free to share your thoughts, even if I've moved on to the next slide. So who is credible? Who do we believe? The credibility complex compounds vulnerabilities. So those who are marginalized in a variety of fronts are seen as less credible, less believable. And so if you hold a lot of different identities, we know things like classism exists, right? We know things like racism exist, ableism, um, age, everything of the sort, all of those things exist. And the more identities you hold regarding these things, a lot of times, believe it or not, you are seen as less credible and less believable. So um, abusers tend to understand how this works and often target victims who are less likely to disclose their abuse. And they will also use mental health coercion, a form of abuse that targets a victim survivor's mental health diagnosis to kind of undermine a survivor's credibility to others, and most dangerously to the survivors themselves. So again, connecting it to what I kind of said earlier, right? Like, this person acts this way all the time. This person is crazy. This person hasn't taken their medications today. And that's why they're saying what they're saying. That's why they're acting the way that they are, making them seem less believable, making them seem less credible. And again, when working with the law, racism exists, classism is a thing. And so if you are a person of color, you are on, um, and you are not somebody who's middle class and up and is able to afford a lot of legal help, um, a lot of times people kind of brush off your experiences and your stories, kind of leaving you to kind of deal with the aftermath on your own, dealing with the abuse on your own. And so, again, making it really, really hard for victim survivors to really just step up and talk about their stories. So the emotional impacts of coercive control results in personality and cognitive changes that diminish a victim survivor's credibility to the public eye. The courts weighs appeals for sympathy against the type of person the defendant is imagined to be. So particularly if a serious crime is involved, a lot of times that would happen. So would um, victim survivors who are especially vulnerable in this respect because their behavior, um, their race, their ethnic background, financial background, anything of the sort can all play into how they are treated, being deemed a worthy victim where you are able to get help, being deemed, a non-credible victim because of your background. Um, just reading the chat, somebody said, I've seen judges, yep, say the victim survivors is being dramatic when testifying. And this is definitely an example of credibility complex, or others saying things like, but he's such a nice guy. There's no way he would do that. Or he would do what you say he's done. Absolutely. And believe it or not, I have seen the same thing to the person saying that in the chat. I have seen the same thing. Judges, actual judges who are sitting in their high chair listening, supposed to help the victim survivor or supposed to really, really um being, again, this person who is well educated, is intelligent, and they're supposed to be there to help the victim survivor or to really um, look at these cases, look at both sides, hear both sides out, and decide from there. Calling victim survivors dramatic as well. I've seen my fair share of that. I've heard my fair share of that. And it's unfortunate, absolutely, and it makes me sad to know that a lot of other people out there can also relate to seeing and hearing the same things. Um, a lot of people, somebody else said, I have had judges and referees victim blame often as well. Absolutely. Again, unfortunate, but we do see that all the time as well working with victim survivors, especially if things end up in court, fighting for custody, fighting for legal battles of anything. We hear that all the time as well. And it happens a lot. A victim blaming mindset. A lot of people out there have a big victim blaming mindset. And even if they don't necessarily think about it, they're not mindful about it, they don't think that they have a victim blaming mindset, they very much do. They'll say a lot of things um, with a very victim blaming mindset all the time. And so happens quite often. Um, Again, unfortunate and sad. And wanting to do our part then, of course, on how we can better educate, how we can better support victim survivors if the legal system is not on their side. So again, deeper into this slide, what influences your credibility? Um, again, your ethnic background, your race, everything of the sort, some way, somehow does influence your credibility. And a lot of times, I feel like this happens a lot with a lot of Black victim survivors that we get to work with, where they don't feel like they can trust the legal system. Even if they are going through abuse and domestic violence, they don't feel safe just simply calling 911 to report the abuse because they simply can't trust that these people are on their side. We know racism exists, again, classism exists. And there are so many barriers to receiving the proper help that you very much need. And being who you are, right? Who you were born as, you can't change it. And all of this then influencing your credibility, influencing whether people choose to believe you or not, just makes it a lot harder to step up and share your stories or to simply just report the abuse. Um, so this slide is barriers to beliefs. The two, well, the first two barriers are intertwined. We're conditioned to be skeptical when survivors come forward. And when we enter the field of advocacy, whether on purpose or otherwise, we have to kind of unlearn that conditioning. Again, a lot of times wanting people to unlearn victim blaming mindsets. And we kind of go deeper into this as in our other webinars as well. Victim blaming mindsets, what that looks like, what that sounds like, how we can better um, support victim survivors, what we can say to help support victim survivors and not enter that victim blaming mindset. So we're socialized to ask questions and oftentimes to kind of doubt certain things. And so our default may be just to simply doubt things and not believe in it unless there's, again, proof. And a lot of you have said in the chat, right? We talked a lot about that a couple slides back, where there's no proof. Why does somebody need proof that they're being abused? Especially if the proof that is needed is a lot of physical proof, a lot of physical documents, a lot of physical um, scars, physical bruises, right? Showcasing that this person was harmed in any way. And if they were not going through any sort of physical abuse, and there is not a lot of physical things to prove. And so this happens all the time too, where people are looking for a lot of the physical and then neglecting just everything else. Um, believing believing shatters our sense of security. Myths about perfect victims or monster perpetrators. This whole talk about perfect victims, I feel like a lot of times, whether people recognize it or not, when they think of a victim survivor in their head, they have an image of somebody. And I want everybody to kind of think about that for themselves right now when you think of the term victim survivor or the perfect victim. Who do you think of? Who is in your head? Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it a child? What's their race? You know, what's their height? Are they um, intelligent? Are they well educated? Or are you thinking of somebody um, who might not fit into um, that image of somebody? So really thinking about it to yourself in your head right now, you know, who do you see? And through things like media, again, movies, TV shows, just everything of the sort, this might influence how we see the quote unquote perfect victim. Or maybe you grew up um, knowing a lot of victim survivors of domestic violence. So in your head, that's, you know, who the perfect victim may be. And to everybody, it may be different. But I think we all, some way, somehow, a lot of people have this very similar image to what a perfect victim looks like. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have this image of what the monster perpetrator looks like, or like the perfect perpetrator. What does that look like? Is it a man? Is it a woman? Are they tall? Are they strong? Are they of a certain race? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What do they do? Are they also highly educated or are they not? You know, plays into it all. Um, so again, very much myths. Anybody can be a victim, anybody can be a perpetrator. But in a lot of people's heads, they have what the perfect victim, what the perfect perpetrator looks like, which is often why, again, going back into the chat, a lot of people tend to say things like, so and so is such a nice person, like they would never do this, they would never say that. It's because they have the idea of what a monster perpetrator, what the perfect perpetrator looks like in their head already. And so when they see somebody that doesn't fit into that image that they have created, they choose not to believe victim survivors. So we also have misconceptions about the nature of abuse. And we're conditioned to kind of keep the peace. If it's not your business, you don't say anything, you don't act upon it, right? If you don't know this person, then there's really no need for you to step in and help them. You don't want to rock the boat. You also don't want to put yourself in danger. Um, so we tend to, quote unquote, keep the peace and just kind of turn a blind eye um, to abuse. Caring about survivors is destabilizing. So all of these on the screen are barriers to beliefs, whether that's with everyday people that we know or with the legal system, it all plays into the barriers. I'm going to take us into part 3 now. So shifting the culture. What can that look like? What can we do? I am going to launch our last poll for this webinar. Let me see if it's going to work with me. Perfect. So just asking all of you, what keeps you from speaking up when you hear misogynistic jokes, victim blaming comments, or misconceptions about abuse? This is a multiple choice, so you can pick as many answers as you want. And if the answer that you have in your mind right now isn't part of the multiple choice answers that we have, feel free to leave them in the chat. I can read them out loud for us. But I'll give us a couple minutes to take this poll. But just what can we do as a community to be more involved in violence prevention and intervention in our own unique ways? If speaking out about it to legal systems is not an option for a lot of victim survivors. So again, believing survivors who come forward about abuse, not having to force them to prove their abuse to you, to prove their pain, to show you their scars, educate, doing what we're doing right now. If you do a lot of educating in your field as well, keep at it. Speak out when we hear these victim blaming comments, especially when they are being passed off as jokes. A lot of times these comments are being passed off as jokes and people take it very lightheartedly. They don't care about it, but we want to be able to call them out and speak out on it when we can. Show up for our friends and neighbors, even if you don't know them personally, even if you're not close with them, you never know what they're going through. And rewiring ourselves, so not getting into that victim blaming mindset and being able to help victim survivors in any way that we can by simply being encouraging, by being showcasing empathy, everything of the sort. I am going to end the poll now and share the results with everyone. So what keeps you from speaking up? We have answers all across the board, but small comments made in passing are hard to address. Social norms against correcting strangers. Yep, discomfort with conflict is a big one. Fear of personal or professional consequences is also a big one. Absolutely. You freeze response and not knowing what to say. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. And I'd also just want to lay it out there that just because you don't speak up, or you're also scared to speak up, or you're scared of, again, fear professional or personal consequences, everything of the sort, this doesn't make you a bad person, right? We know that we do, of course, want to prioritize our safety as well. We don't want to put our safety in jeopardy. And a lot of times it is hard to simply just address these issues. And so if you haven't in the past, if there are things about it that you're fearful of, know that you are not a bad person and that you are not wrong, because these are all very, very real, true answers. Again, if you have other answers that you'd like to share in the chat, feel free to do so. I'm going to continue now to what keeps us silent. So again, very much diving deeper into the poll that we just took in the chat. If you have ever spoken out in response to a victim blaming comment or a misconception about abuse, what was the situation and how did it go? A lot of times we do speak out, and it's understandable that the response that you get back isn't what you want. So if you have done this before, and if you feel comfortable sharing, feel free to share in the chat, and let everybody know about how that situation went and how that went for you. If it ended the way that you wanted it to, if the response that you got was what you wanted, and if not, how did that go as well? So breaking down the doubt. Um, Start by believing. This takes work to make a habit out of. It's not as easy as simply just believing as well. Our default is super ingrained, and we have to actively participate in changing that, doing our best to shift the mindset. And why it's important to believe our loved ones out loud. So if you do believe them, share that out loud, share that with them, let them know, let it be known. Don't shy away from empathizing with the victim survivors. Whether you know these people personally or whether you work with them, share them out loud, your thoughts that you believe them. Um, so on the screen, we have things like an example is saying something like, that long ago, why did it take you so long to tell me? How could I have helped you if you had told me, or I could have helped you if you could have told me when it happened. So again, very much getting into the victim blaming mindset of why are you talking about it now? Why are you bringing it up now? If this happened a long time ago, if it was that serious, if it was, if it hurt you that much, why didn't you talk about it then? Blah, blah, blah. Instead, you want to shift your mindset into maybe saying something like, thank you for telling me. I believe you, and I can't imagine how hard this has been for you. A simple phrase of the sort can go a long way. And I'm sure a lot of you would know, especially if you work with victim survivors of domestic violence already. So breaking down the doubt, shifting our mindset. So just a little bit more about what breaking down the myths may look like. I'm going to go to the next last slide. This is all about the doubts. This is all about the myths. So for example, one that we have on the screen is she's going about this all wrong, yelling and telling everybody all of the details. More people would support her if she wasn't being so rude about it. What can we say instead? Or what do we know instead? So you and I both know that the quote unquote rude thing here is what was done to her, not the way she's reacting. She's not being rude, she's hurting, and she deserves our support. And now we want to break down the misconceptions. So on the screen, an example is, if things were really that bad, how come I didn't notice? If there was abuse, I definitely would have seen something. Again, this quote very much is tying into the physical aspect of it, right? Like, I don't see it, therefore it's not happening. They're not showing it, therefore it's not happening. This person isn't showing their pain. They're not proving their pain to us, therefore it's not happening. So what we can say instead is maybe, maybe not. So many survivors stay quiet about abuse, and there's not always physical evidence to see. Not noticing doesn't make you a bad friend. It means the abuse was hidden. And therefore, building off of that, what can we do to show our support? Somebody in the comments said, in a recent conversation with a loved one, he made a comment that felt like it was uninformed and victim blaming. I spoke up about the context and we talked about it. He said, I guess I never looked at it from your perspective. He understood why his words were not helpful or sensitive and said, thank you for calling me out. I like that. I like how you were able to do that. And the response that you got was not putting your safety in jeopardy in any way. A lot of times people can retaliate, right? And they can say something back. And it's not really the response that you want. So I'm glad that this situation ended up well for you, and that this person was open-minded to being able to learn from somebody else's perspective. So that's Good to know. Thank you so much for sharing. So this is a permission slip. If you don't need a permission slip, but if you do, here it is, the permission slip to release you from politeness, to cause a scene, to speak up, to say something. Um, you have permission to make noise, to cause trouble, to make people uncomfortable with the truth, educating them about domestic violence and telling the truth in defense of victims, survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. Again, very much not putting your own safety in jeopardy, but also not wanting to always stay quiet when we hear and see these things as well. And when we act upon it and people are able to see that, you'll be surprised the amount of people who will follow and start to act upon it as well. Tips and tools for cultural change. So one, make a pact with a friend if you'd like, keeping it simple, something doable, something right. Script it out if you'd like, and remember why you're doing this. Why are you standing up for victim survivors? Why do we want to shift the legal system? Why do we want to do better? Why do we not want to get into a victim blaming mindset? And then hoping and doing our best to do better. So we do all have the ability to kind of shift our culture from automatic victim blaming and minimizing the impact of abuse to centering, validating the beliefs of victim survivors. On the screen, the quote says, a positive response from close and extended members of the community can help restore a sense of control and security, which is critical to healing. Absolutely. Whether you are an advocate working with the victim survivor, you are a family member, a friend, or a stranger, a lot of times having people help speak up for you goes a long way. And you remember the kind gestures of these people for years and years to come. And you start to remember who's on your side, who's there to believe you, and who's not, and kind of shifting our victim blaming mindset, be able to help victim survivors of domestic violence. We are nearing the end. These are just more resources. If you are here and you are looking for a certificate of attendance, please do stick with me towards the very end, but we do have some resources available here. Some further readings about all of the things we kind of talked about throughout this webinar. These will be emailed out to you either later today or tomorrow, so feel free to look forward to that if you'd like to visit these slides. We do have an online survivor support group, so if you or somebody you know needs our services and wants to join our support group for victim survivors of domestic violence, feel free to tell them about us. Scan the QR code on the screen if you'd like to join, or have them reach out to us and we will be in touch with them. This is just a survey we like to give out at the end of every webinar for you to take. Feel free to click on that if you feel comfortable to take it. But we are at the end now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me and for listening to me talk about domestic violence and coercive control. This one is, again, DV201, so we dive just a little bit deeper into what domestic violence may look like. So thank you. Thank you all for being here and for listening, and hoping that we all have learned something new today.